The first thing I remember after the chaos was the silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, suffocating one that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My body was a battlefield of aches, a dull, throbbing map of the ordeal I had just survived. I had brought 7 tiny souls into this world, 7 daughters, and the reward for my labor wasn't flowers or whispered words of love. It was the sting of betrayal, the cold, hard floor against my cheek, and the sight of my husband, Mark, standing over me, his face a mask of pure, undiluted rage. He hadn't even waited for the nurses to leave the room. He hadn't waited for me to be unhooked from the machines. He had struck me while I was still wearing the thin, paper-like hospital gown, my body still trembling from the aftershocks of birth. 7 of them, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that cut deeper than any shout. And not a single one is a boy. What am I supposed to do with 7 girls? And I tried to push myself up, my arms shaking, my vision blurry. I could hear my babies crying from their incubators across the room, a chorus of tiny, desperate wails. They were calling for their mother, and I couldn't even get to my feet. A nurse rushed forward, her face pale with shock, but Mark shot her a look so menacing she froze in place. He wasn't just angry, he was broken in a way that had turned him into a monster. He looked at me, lying on the floor, and I saw no remorse in his eyes. Only disgust. He saw me not as his wife, not as the mother of his children, but as a profound disappointment. A failure. This was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about his desire for a son. This was about his pride, his ego, his twisted belief that my body had personally betrayed him. The love I thought we had, the life we had built, it was all a lie, shattered on the cold, sterile floor of a maternity ward. As he turned his back on me and walked out of the room, leaving me with the sound of my crying daughters, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. He thought this was my end. He thought he had broken me. He was wrong. This wasn't my ending. This was the beginning of his NHEY. Everyone, if this story already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Now let's get back to how it all unfolded. In the gilded cage, our life from the outside was perfect. Mark was a successful architect, a man who built monuments of glass and steel that scraped the sky. He was handsome, charismatic, and admired by everyone we knew. Our home was a sprawling, modern masterpiece he had designed himself, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a manicured garden. To our friends and family, we were the golden couple. I was the quiet, supportive wife, the artist who had given up her own ambitions to raise a family. He was the brilliant provider. But a house made of glass is a fragile thing, and ours was already full of cracks. And I met Mark in college. He was a force of nature, full of grand plans and a burning ambition that was both intimidating and intoxicating. He swept me off my feet with poetry and promises of a future where we would conquer the world together. I was a painter, my canvases filled with color and emotion. He told me he loved my passion, my spirit, but after we married, he began to subtly suffocate it. "This painting is a bit too dark, don't you think?" he'd say. Or, "Maybe you could paint something more cheerful, something that would match the decor." Slowly, my vibrant canvases were replaced with muted landscapes, and eventually, the easel was packed away into a storage room, replaced by the duties of a perfect wife. NHI's obsession with having a son started early. It was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of our marriage. When I became pregnant for the first time, he was ecstatic. He bought tiny blue outfits, miniature baseball gloves, and talked endlessly about my boy, my heir. When our first daughter, Lily, was born, his disappointment was a physical presence in the room. He smiled for the cameras and the family, but later that night he said, "Don't worry, we'll get it right next time." With each subsequent pregnancy, the pressure mounted. Our second daughter, Rose, then Iris, then Daisy. Each birth was met with a thinner smile, a longer silence. He started calling them your girls, as if they were solely my responsibility, my failure. He provided for them financially. Yes, they had the best clothes, the best schools, the best toys, but he was emotionally absent, a ghost in his own home. He never attended their school plays or parent-teacher conferences. He dismissed their achievements with a wave of his hand. He was building a legacy of steel and glass, and in his mind, he had no one to leave it to. I tried to compensate. I poured all my love, all my energy into my daughters. I taught them to be strong, to be kind, to value themselves, even when their own father didn't. I became their shield, absorbing his coldness, his dismissive remarks, his growing resentment. I told myself it was enough. I told myself that as long as he never laid a hand on us, we could survive his emotional winter. I was a fool. The emotional abuse was just the foundation he was laying for something far worse. NTHE pregnancy with the septuplets was a shock. It was high risk, grueling, and terrifying. My body was pushed to its absolute limit. Mark's reaction was not concern for my health, but a renewed, manic hope. 7 chances, he said, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. Surely one of them has to be a boy. He saw it as his final opportunity to get the son he so desperately craved. I saw it as 7 more souls to protect from the storm that was brewing in our home. The day of the birth, as they wheeled me into the delivery room, he didn't kiss me or wish me luck. He just gripped my hand and said, "Don't fail me." The promise in the dark NTHE days following the assault in the hospital are a blur of pain, shame, and a simmering, volcanic rage. The hospital staff were kind but awkward, their pity a constant reminder of my humiliation. They filed a report, of course. A social worker came to speak with me, her voice gentle, her questions careful. But Mark was a master manipulator. He returned the next day with an expensive bouquet of lilies, the flower of funerals, and an apology so smooth, so practiced, it could have convinced a saint. He claimed he was in shock, distraught from the stress of the birth, that he blacked out and didn't know what he was doing. He wept. He begged. He swore it would never happen again. And I knew he was lying. I saw it in the flicker of his eyes, the slight curl of his lip as he thought he had won. But I played my part. I told the social worker it was a misunderstanding, a one-time incident fueled by fear and exhaustion. Why? Because I knew the system wouldn't save me. Mark was wealthy, powerful, and respected. I was a hysterical new mother of 7. Who would they believe? Leaving him then, with no money, no plan, and 7 premature infants, would have been a catastrophic mistake. He would have used his power to take my children from me, painting me as an unstable mother. NSO. I made a decision in the sterile quiet of that hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of the monitors as my witness. I would go home. I would smile. I would play the part of the forgiving wife. But I would be a spy in my own life. I would gather my strength, my resources, and my evidence. And when the time was right, I wouldn't just leave him. I would dismantle the empire he loved more than his own family, brick by brick. NTHE Day we brought the girls home was a carefully orchestrated performance. Mark had hired a team of nurses to help. The house was filled with the scent of baby powder and the sound of crying. He posed for photos, holding one of the babies awkwardly, his smile as hollow as his promises. He was playing the part of the doting father for the world, but when no one was looking, he wouldn't even glance at the cradles. NMY older daughters, Lily, Rose, Iris, and Daisy, were old enough to sense the shift. They saw the faint bruise on my cheek that makeup couldn't quite hide. They saw the way I flinched when he entered a room. They saw the emptiness in his eyes when he looked at their new sisters. One evening, Lily, my eldest, came to me while I was feeding one of the newborns. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her small arms around my shoulders and held on tight. In that moment, we were allies. She didn't know the details of my plan, but she knew we were on the same side. NMY secret war began. I started with knowledge. Mark had always handled the finances, keeping me in the dark, giving me an allowance like a child. I began to educate myself. Late at night, when the house was asleep, I used the family computer to study business management, accounting, and corporate law. I learned about his company, his partners, his investments. I read every document I could find, receipts, bank statements, blueprints. I was no longer just a painter. I was becoming a strategist. Every piece of information was a bullet, and I was slowly loading my gun, forging the armor. Years passed. On the surface, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. The 7 babies, who we named Zara, Maya, Nora, Eva, Clara, Sophia, and Bella, grew from fragile infants into curious toddlers and then into bright, energetic little girls. Our home was a whirlwind of ponytails, scraped knees, and laughter. It was a fortress of femininity, a fact that was a constant, unspoken source of irritation for Mark. He retreated further into his work, often staying late at the office or traveling for business. His presence at home was a cold draft, a reminder of the man who paid the bills but offered no warmth. NMY's own transformation was happening in the shadows. The money I had started saving from selling my paintings online, small, abstract pieces I created in the dead of night, was growing. I opened a secret bank account, a lifeline he knew nothing about. It wasn't much at first, but with every sale, I felt a surge of independence. It was my armor, being forged $1 at a time, and I also reconnected with my old life, the one I had abandoned for him. I reached out to friends from art school, one of whom was now a successful gallery owner. I confided in her, not about the abuse, but about my desire to paint again, to have my own career. She became my mentor and my confidant. She helped me build a portfolio, critiqued my work, and encouraged me to find my voice again. My art began to change. The muted landscapes were gone, replaced by powerful, emotional pieces that told a story of struggle, resilience, and hidden strength. They were portraits of my soul, and people were starting to notice. NMY daughters were my co-conspirators, even if they didn't know the full extent of the mission. I raised them to be fiercely independent and observant. I taught them to be tech-savvy, to understand the world beyond our gilded cage. Lily, my eldest, developed a keen interest in coding. Rose became a gifted writer, her journals filled with sharp observations. Iris had a mind for numbers, just like I was developing. They were my army, and they were getting stronger every day. NTHE, most crucial part of my plan, was gathering evidence. Mark was arrogant. He believed I was the same naive girl he had married. He grew careless. He left his work laptop open. He took business calls on speakerphone. He bragged to his friends about his clever financial maneuvers. I became a ghost, documenting everything. I photographed documents, recorded conversations, and made copies of incriminating emails. I discovered he wasn't just an ambitious architect, he was a corrupt one. He was using substandard materials in major construction projects, bribing inspectors, and creating shell corporations to hide the profits. He was building a beautiful facade, but the foundation was rotten, and I had the proof. And one evening, he came home in a rare good mood. He had just won a massive, prestigious contract to build a new city library, a landmark project. He was gloating, pouring expensive whiskey, and talking about the legacy he was building. "This library will stand for 100 years, he boasted. "My name will be on it forever." I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. I looked at him and thought, no, it won't, because I knew the truth. I knew the foundation of that library, like the foundation of our marriage, was built on lies. And I was the one who was going to bring it all crashing down. And the first crack in the damn THE turning point came 5 years after the day in the hospital. My secret art career had taken off in a way I never imagined. Under a pseudonym, I had a sold-out gallery show in another city. The critics raved about the raw emotional power of the work. The money from the sales was substantial, enough to secure a future for me and my 11 daughters. The taste of that success, of my own power, was intoxicating. It was the final piece of armor I needed. I was no longer afraid. I decided it was time to create the first crack in Mark's perfect world. It had to be subtle, something that would rattle him but not reveal my hand. I chose his most trusted business partner, a man named David. From my research, I knew David was the details man, the one who handled the dirty work of hiding the money and falsifying reports. I also knew his wife had recently left him, and he was emotionally vulnerable. Using an anonymous email address and a burner phone, I sent a single, cryptic message to David. It contained a scanned copy of one of the most damning documents I had found, a falsified invoice for steel beams for a skyscraper project, showing the vast difference between what was paid for and what was actually used. The message simply said, "He's building a house of cards. Get out before it falls." The effect was immediate. I watched from the shadows as the fallout began. Mark started having hushed, frantic phone calls with David. Their weekly golf games stopped. There were tense, late-night meetings at our house, the sound of their angry, raised voices seeping through the walls of Mark's home office. Mark became paranoid, irritable, his temper shorter than ever. He started looking over his shoulder, suspecting betrayal from every corner of his empire, never once suspecting the enemy was sleeping in his bed. NHE took his stress out on us. The verbal jabs became more frequent, his anger a constant, simmering threat. One evening, he flew into a rage because my second daughter, Rose, had accidentally spilled juice on one of his architectural drawings. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging in, his face contorted with fury. Before I could even think, I moved. I placed my hand firmly on his wrist and squeezed, my voice low and cold as ice. "Let her go." NHE was so shocked by my defiance that he stumbled back, his hand dropping from her arm. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as the timid, compliant wife, but as someone he didn't recognize. The fear in his eyes was fleeting, but I saw it. It was the first time he had ever been afraid of me. The power dynamic in the house had irrevocably shifted. The dam had its first crack, and I knew the flood was coming. NTHE alliance, NTHE incident with Rose was a declaration of war. Mark knew something had changed, but his arrogance wouldn't allow him to believe I was the source of his problems. He blamed David. He blamed his rivals. He blamed bad luck. He never looked at the woman who was quietly orchestrating his downfall. NMY next move was to secure a powerful ally. I needed someone on the inside, someone with the legal power to detonate the bomb I had built. Through my gallery owner friend, I was introduced to a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was one of the most feared forensic accountants and corporate lawyers in the country, a woman known for taking down corrupt CEOs and dismantling fraudulent companies. She was also a passionate advocate for women's rights, and our first meeting took place in a discreet coffee shop far from my neighborhood. I brought a single file with me, a curated sample of the evidence I had collected. I told her everything: the abuse, the neglect, the financial crimes. I laid out the story of the past 5 years, my voice steady, my purpose clear. She listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and analytical. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at the file, then back at me. "Most people come to me with a problem, wanting a solution," Eleanor said, her voice crisp and decisive. "You've come to me with a locked and loaded weapon, and you're asking me to help you pull the trigger. The evidence you have here is explosive. It's not just enough to ruin him, it's enough to put him in prison for a very long time." NSHE agreed to take my case pro bono, not out of pity but out of a shared sense of justice. She saw the same thing in me that I was starting to see in myself, a woman who had turned her pain into power. We formed an alliance, a secret partnership. Eleanor and her team began to work behind the scenes, using my evidence as a roadmap. They started digging deeper, subpoenaing records, and building an airtight legal case against Mark and his company. Meanwhile, I prepared my daughters for the final act. I sat down with the older girls, Lily, Rose, Iris, and Daisy, and told them the truth. Not every sordid detail of the abuse, but enough for them to understand. I told them we were leaving their father, and that things were going to be difficult for a while, but that we were doing it to build a safe and happy future. I expected tears or fear. Instead, I saw relief and a fierce, protective loyalty in their eyes. "We're with you, Mom," Lily said, speaking for all of them. "Whatever it takes." They were no longer just my daughters. They were my soldiers. The final betrayal NTHE plan was set for a Tuesday. It was the day of the annual gala for Mark's architecture firm. a night where he would be on stage, accepting an award, basking in the spotlight he so desperately craved. It was the perfect stage for his public execution. That morning, I acted as if nothing was wrong. I helped him choose his tuxedo. I smiled and wished him luck. He was so consumed with his own glory that he didn't notice the emptiness in my eyes or the finality in my touch. He was arrogant to the last, believing he was untouchable. As soon as he left for the gala, our operation began. A moving truck, arranged by Eleanor, pulled up to the house. My daughters and I moved with quiet efficiency, packing the last of our personal belongings, the things that truly mattered: photo albums, school projects, my paintings, the 7 tiny hospital bracelets from the day my youngest daughters were born. We stripped the house of our presents, leaving behind the cold, empty shell of a life that was never really ours. And as we worked, Eleanor initiated the legal assault. A server delivered a lawsuit to Mark's office. His business partners were served at their homes. And an anonymous tip, complete with a mountain of evidence, was delivered to the city's top investigative journalist, a woman known for her relentless pursuit of corporate corruption. NTHE's final piece of the puzzle was personal. I had discovered Mark was having an affair. It was a cliché, really, his young, ambitious assistant. The betrayal barely registered as pain anymore. It was just another tool to use. I packaged the proof, photos, hotel receipts, copies of their private messages, and sent it to the one person who could make it hurt: the assistant's fiancé, a man from a prominent and powerful family. NBY, the time Mark stepped onto the stage at the gala, his world was already burning down around him, and he didn't even know it. The journalist's story was about to break online. His partners were frantically calling their lawyers. His mistress's life was imploding. He stood at the podium holding his award, smiling for the cameras, a king addressing his subjects from a castle that had already turned to dust. NWE were gone before he got home. I drove the car, my 11 daughters safely with me, heading towards a new, fully furnished home that Eleanor had helped me secure. I didn't look back. As we crossed the city limits, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert. The headline was stark: Architect of the Year under investigation for massive fraud and endangerment scandal. I smiled. The fire was spreading, and justice and the ashes in THE aftermath was a maelstrom. Mark's downfall was swift, brutal, and public. The news story went viral, a spectacular implosion of a celebrated public figure. The details of his fraud, the faulty materials, the bribes, the shell corporations, were laid bare for the world to see. The prestigious library project was immediately halted, his name forever attached to a scandal of epic proportions. He was arrested, his smug face on every news channel, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. NHI's personal life disintegrated just as quickly. His partners turned on him to save themselves. His mistress's engagement was broken, her family ensuring she would face the consequences. He was left with nothing: no company, no reputation, no friends, and no family. The empire he valued more than his own children was a pile of ashes, and our new life was quiet, and for the first time, peaceful. We lived in a modest but comfortable house, one filled with our own laughter, our own art, our own rules. The legal battle was long, but with Eleanor by my side, the outcome was never in doubt. The divorce settlement, fueled by his criminal charges, was more than fair. I was awarded full custody of all 11 girls. He was sentenced to prison. His legacy, not a library, but a cautionary tale of greed and hubris. One afternoon, a few years later, I was in my art studio, a bright, airy room I had built in our new home. My daughters were all thriving. Lily was accepted into a top university for computer science. Rose had won a national writing award. My 7 youngest were happy, well-adjusted girls who had never known the fear of their father's anger, and I was working on a new painting. It was a portrait of 11 girls, their faces a mix of strength, resilience, and joy. In the center was a woman, her hands covered in paint, her expression serene. It was a portrait of us, a portrait of survival,